was going to show you the record, but I'll show you the book again. So, so we're up to let's see what we got here. Okay, so yeah, so chapter 4 is page. I'm up at 109, and this chapter is at least 100 pages, I think. So yeah, so yeah, 217. So like this weekend, I'll be reading up until 217, chapter 5. But this chapter is 100, or chapter 4. The next chapter is 104. This chapter was only like 50 pages, so it's kind of short. So let's go back to chapter 3 and read a little bit of it. We had the flashback, and in this book, it starts on page 43. So what does he do? We go back to the flashback is over, so now he's kind of like settling in, and he's starting to meet people. Hans Castorp had been afraid he would oversleep. He had been so thoroughly exhausted, but he was up and about earlier than necessary and had plenty of time leisurely to pursue his usual highly civilized morning routine. Its chief utensils included a rubber basin, a wooden bowl of green lavender scented soap, and a straw colored brush, and was not able only to tend to matters of personal hygiene, but also to unpack and put his things away. And as he paused, the silver blade across the perfume foam on his cheeks, he recalled his muddled dream and smiled an indulgent smile at such nonsense, shaking his head with the superiority of a man shaving by the light of a reasonable day. He did not feel all that well rested, but fresh enough to meet the morning. He powdered his cheeks and slipped into his plaid undershorts and red Morocco leather slippers, and still drying his hands, he stepped out onto the balcony, which, although private, was connected to those adjoining and separated from them only by an opaque glass partition that extended almost to the railing. The morning was cool and cloudy. Long banks of fog lay motionless along the hills to both sides, while masses of clouds, white and gray, were draped on the more distant mountains. Patches and streaks of blue sky were visible here and there, and when a ray of sun broke through, the village in the valley below glistened white against the dark forest of the pine on the slopes. Somewhere, morning music was playing. Presumably, it came from the same hotel where the concert had been held the evening before. Muted chords of a chorale drifted towards him. A march followed after a brief pause. Hans Castorp loved music with all his heart, its effect being much like that of the porter he drank with his morning snack, profoundly calming, numbing, and doze-inducing, and he listened now with pleasure, his head tilted to one side, mouth open, eyes slightly bloodshot. So he's kind of getting comfortable in his room, his neighbors, he's starting to meet people. Like Joyce, Thomas Mann is sort of is good at blocking. You kind of know where you are. It's sort of good. So, oh yeah. So in the description for this third chapter, I linked a little movie from 1987, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, and it has it's like a lot of those movies. It's part of a 10 great writer series where they have like scenes from the book acted out, like Thomas Mann being a lecturer, and just like critics like talking about his work. So it's kind of like similar movies about James Joyce and Samuel Beckett that I've seen. So let's see what happened. What actually happens in chapter 3? We've had the first chapter here. He's traveling to the Berghoff sanatorium. second chapter is like kind of going back into childhood history. Then we have the third chapter. This chapter serves two main functions: that of introducing Hans Castorp to real life at the Berghof and its director, Hofrad Behrens, as well as to the two characters who will vie for his attention from now on, Settembrini and Claudia Couchat. Second, the chapter opens with a discussion of the nature of time, the novel's other major theme. The particular impressions Hans Castorp collects characterize the atmosphere of physical and moral decay prevailing at the sanatorium when Joachim introduces his cousin to several patients at their first breakfast together. The array of characters they meet affords them a glimpse of all the misery and falseness that they will live with throughout their stay. Quaint little habits, distinct accents, gross flaws, and most unusual looks identify each of those assembled as all the representatives of his specific profession or corner of the continent. All of them are sick members of society. The fact that they are all extremely wealthy is by no means a coincidence and adds to the vital social and political implications of the book. The most memorable among the minor characters Castorp meets here is perhaps Frau Storr, whose unbelievable stupidity and coarseness puts her on the lowest rank of the social ladder at the Berghof. It is also important to note that sterile, sick, and half dead, though the patients here may be, socializing and sham accompaniment, it does not interest them as much as they needed it to stimulate ordinary life below. Like so many other patients, Frau Starr is forever anxious to cover up her total lack of intelligence and education by carrying on highbrow conversations and acting sophisticated. Her overtly cultured ways, which cannot hide her countless gaucheries, are symptomatic of her society's essential barbarism. Here, man proves himself a perfect caricaturist, caricaturist, I guess, caricaturist, uh, caricature, the guy that does caricatures, caricature, employing recurring motifs and picking picturesque, appropriate names. The consistently stupid expression of Frau Storr's face, for instance, is described in terms of her rodent-like teeth. As the story goes on, this set of teeth becomes Frau Storr. Also, her name means surgeon in German and spelled slightly differently, stubborn, which provides ample leeway for the German-speaking reader, punning imagination. To top it all off, Frau Storr keeps boasting of the 28 different fish sauces she can fix. Thus, she's a perfect example of a patient whose insensitivity and total lack of potential keeps her disease from working in her favor. In sensitive people like Castorp, a rise in the fever curve signifies growing awareness, a sharpening of the intelligence. In the case of Frau Storr, on the other hand, all there is for tuberculosis to bring out is the purely physical aspect of disease. She remains gross and stupid until the end. The same can be true of Claudia Couchat, although her deficiency is not one of intelligence. She will remain sensual and passive throughout the book. There are others. There are other more shocking instances of the sham facade of the sanatorium world, such as the threats of Herr Albin, a hopeless case to commit suicide. Playing with his gun, the young man meets nothing but angry protests from his fellow patients who are extremely eager to avoid any thought of death. When they insist that he will be cured if he only stops toying with his weapon, it is their cowardice they show and not their sympathy for him. The more they pretend to console him, the more he feels challenged to uncover their unwillingness to face reality. More than that, Albin says that he is content with his fate because now, certain of his impending death, he can resign himself to idleness, such as he did in school when the teacher would not call upon him anymore because his failure was a fact. Herr Albin's mention of his high school days triggers a faint first picture of Castorp's own school days. He is startled by a wild wave of sweetness which swept over him. The remembering of his school days, of his school friend Hippe, maybe, and the foreshadowing of the exchange of the pencil with Claudia has begun. This is one of the book's major motifs. Joachim casually tells his cousin that many patients die without anyone knowing anything about it because such unpleasant events are handled with utmost discreetness. Physical illness, in other words, is treated exactly like the moral sickness of exaggerated class consciousness. It is ignored. The doctors of the sanatorium, the ruling politicians of the world below are anxious to conceal death, moral bankruptcy from the public. As a result, the climate of the pretense at Bergedorf in pre-war Europe stands in eerie contrast to death, which rules supreme. The theme of the ennobling and dehumanizing aspects of death, touched upon previously in connection with Frau Starr, figured prominently in Castorp's reaction to Baron's brutal treatment of dying patients. Hence, Castorp insists that the dying human should be treated with respect because he is always more venerable than a chap going about laughing and earning his living and eating 3 meals a day. The the sensitivity he showed at his grandfather's deathbed is still there, though he seems to have become less certain that sadness can only prevail where life is concerned. He has begun to view life and death as two aspects of one and the same thing. In connection with his heart palpitations, Castor's preoccupation with the subject comes out again. Later, Mann will transfer its discussion to the level of purely philosophical discourses between Settembrini and Naphtha. But for the time being, Hans worries about his palpitations and remarks to Joachim, it is disturbing and unpleasant to have the body act as though it had no connection with the soul. The dichotomy between body and soul, life and death is beginning to strike him as something to give more thought to, something he will transcend as his self-awareness grows. Joachim introduces his cousin to Seppертini, the Italian gentleman of fine features and great learning, the apostle of reason, progress, and humanism. He is one of Hans' chief mentors throughout the novel. Revealing himself as a man of letters, he goes about reciting Italian poetry and telling the cousins of his translations and telling the cousins of his translations of liberal thinkers. One of these men he translated had composed a hymn to Satan himself, Satan in the form of unbridled revolution. The Italian baffles Castorp by comparing his visit to Berghof with Odysseus' venture into the realm of shadows. To Hans' objection that he has come up several thousand feet, Seppертini cynically replies that Hans has been a victim of an illusion. Seppертini's admiration for Renaissance poetry and figures of Greek mythology shows how much he lives in the Greco-Roman tradition. So it's a lot like he's a little bit like he's almost like a James Joyce kind of parody in a way. Seppертini can extricate himself from the paradox of having to be dogmatic about his liberalism. He is rather willing to wage war against Austria, Russia, and the Church, but his fanaticism and also has a pedantic side to it, insisting to Castorp that smoking has been despised by the most brilliant thinkers in history because it befogs the mind. He declares it a vice. And Castorp, he's been smoking Maria Mancini cigars the whole time. And yeah, I mean, reading these 3 chapters, you notice that Castorp has a lot of dreams, and they kind of predict or reveal things. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so how much time? Okay, so we've been going for. Okay, so no. questions, no answers. Let's see. Let me just try to summarize a summary. Whether Mann chose Separatini's name deliberately and not, the long battle between the Austrian Empire and the individual Italian states over unification and independence, of which World War One was merely the final, most violent outbreak, is a major theme of the novel's political level. When Castorp finds the patient who keeps irritating him by slamming doors in the dining hall, he's surprised at her attractiveness, above all by her slanted eyes, protruding cheekbones, and delicate girlish hands that pats her hair. A vague memory of somebody stirred him slightly and fleetingly as he looked. Claudia Couchat's Asiatic features captivate him. The strange fascination Claudia Couchat exerts on Castorp leads to the latter's mounting confusion. Her effect on him is such that at one point he cannot even muster up enough strength to look at the blood he coughed up, a clear symbol of the decay she spreads. Claudia is like a scintillating and pungent carnivorous plant, enticing her prey by dulling its senses rather than striking out herself. She is not even aware of her devastating influence on Castorp. This fact underlies her passivity. The implications of her sensual and irrational character are eminently political, as are the Russian couple who keeps offending Castorp by promiscuously giggling and panting in the room next to his. Man simplifies, of course, but he nevertheless has a point, as the political history of Eastern and Central Europe has shown for hundreds of years, whether ruled by a czarist or a communistic tyranny, whether ruled by oppression, power politics, or Nazi imperialism, Eastern and Central European Slavic people have never had a democratic tradition to speak of, at least not before the end of the 20th century. Hungarians have, but they're not Slavs. It is not by accident that the obscene sounds of the Russian couple are accompanied by hackneyed tunes of operetta music, symbols of imperial Austria. This theme of Eastern and Western traits will crop up again in connection with the far touchier discussions of whether intellectual literature may be pitted against emotional music. Immediately after Castorp meets Separatini and Claudia Couchat, the two become embattled over him. Asked about his age by Sapertini, Castorp has to think twice before answering him correctly. Then, when he talks gibberish, the Italian advises him to return to the world below. This marks Sapertini's first intervention in Hand's support. The second one comes that night in Hand's dream when Hofrat Barons advises him to while away his time in pursuit of pleasure. Sapertini, in his dream, admonishes Hans to resist the diabolic forces of Barons, but Hans refuses to pay any attention to his clear-headed advice. Yet the Italian realizes Hans' condition and keeps up the warning. In the same dream, Castorp finds himself back in the school court of his high school, where he borrows a pencil from Claudia Couchat. Towards dawn, he dreams of her again, this time of the open, delicate hand which he offers him to kiss. This hand was the very first thing he noticed about her, and now it triggers the same wild wave of sweetness in which he experienced when he put himself in Herr Albin's position earlier that day. The connection is evident. Herr Albin was bound to die and played with the idea of committing suicide. Castorp is moving towards his own death, though, through Claudia. The emergence of Claudia Couchat in the school court is the most thoroughly developed leitmotif in the novel, pulling together episodes of both real and imagined over long spans of time. The leitmotif strongly suggests Mann's familiarity with Sigmund Freud's theory of dreams. In fact, Mann studied them while writing Magic Mountain. He was also familiar with Freud's psychoanalytic experiments. Therefore, it be it may be not too far fetched to see in Separatini the great admonisher towards self control and responsibility, a embodiment of the hero's superego, and Claudia Caccia, the tempers towards sensuality, may then be seen as Hans' id. We have made the point that Mann conceives of virtually all the characters in novels in terms of opposites. In fact, most of them are defined in terms of their opposites. Separatini and Claudia Caccia form such a set of opposites. Separatini and Napta later on, and Castorp and Joachim also. If the relationship between the cousins was well characterized in chapter one, there are new insights here to with regards to Barons. He prefers the more pliable and susceptible character of Hans to that of Joachim, which makes him think that Hans would be a better patient than his cousin. As stated on the outset of this chapter, Magic Mountain is also a novel about the mystery of time. Chapter 3 introduces the subject of explicitly in the form of the conversation between the cousins. It develops out of Castorp's annoyance over the tedious procedure of having to take his temperature 4 times a day, yet his annoyance is only seemingly insignificant, for it soon turns out that boredom plays a very real role in discussion about time. Time, after all, is the correlative of experience. So, as to be expected, from Joachim's complicated nature, he is quite willing to let the various time measuring devices determine what time is. Castorp, however, is more sophisticated and argues that time is as long as short as one experiences it. When Joachim, getting tired of mental gymnastics, contends that a minute lasts as long as it takes the second hand of my watch to complete a circuit. Hans is still not satisfied. Considering Joachim's words, he concludes that we measure time by space. It does not mean much to say it takes 24 hours from Hamburg to Davos, for on foot it takes infinitely longer, and in the mind, not even a second. This notion of time as a function of space will be developed further when Hans tries to find some relationship between time and the circles he makes wandering around in the snowstorm. Time is not merely a major theme of the novel, it is also its medium. All of chapter 3 deals with events during Castorp's first day of the Bergdorf. It begins exactly where chapter 1 ended, with Hans getting up in the morning. The point is clear. Once a newcomer has lived through one day at the sanatorium, the best he can hope for, as novelty is concerned, the best he can hope for as far as novelty is concerned are new ways of fighting boredom and confusion. A day is like a month, is like a year at the Bergdorf, and all of it is like a spell of uncertain duration. The static quality of time stands out, as Castorp puts it on his first afternoon up there. Good Lord, is it still only the first day? It seems to me I've been up here a long time, ages. So that's pretty much it. He has a few. Oh, okay. So from now on, there's one last part. From now on, single chapters of this book will not treat a day, but weeks, months, and even years of Hans Castorp's life. No wonder, for Hans reflects at one point, a path is always longer the first time we traverse it. So yeah, so chapter 1 and 3 are pretty much the same day, and chapter 2 is looking back. When we get to chapter 4, and 5 and 6 and 7, those are all probably take over a year, I'm guessing. So there you have it. That's chapter 3, Magic Mountain. You should be up to page 109. And so today's Wednesday. So sometime next week. So today's the 25th. So sometime around October 1st, I'll do another video. So we should be able to read. So where is this thing again? I can't believe things. Let me take a look. Yeah, well, not there. And yeah. No. Okay, so of course I find Ulysses right here. So where? So yeah, my Death in Venice record is missing, and that's not good. So let's make sure. Let's not. Let's end it. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy the book. Uh, as we're talking about this book, it kind of. I mean, it seems like what the things, the politics, and the things that are mentioned. It's kind of obvious why this book's an important book. Okay. Good night, everybody.